Okay. Hello everyone and welcome back to this week's short but snappy Remind podcast. So today, my name's David Masterton, joined by Dr. Ashleigh Moreland, and we're going to be talking about the number one thing that stops couples from being truly connected. I had to cheat by looking at my other screen. So this is this going to be a short episode? I'll hope so. But anyway, okay, so Ash, since I've introed, and the last time we did this, I believe I went first. So I'm going to hand it over to you. What do you think number one top things that stop people or partners from being connected?
I'm laughing because I said to Dave, I'm so cheating with this because I couldn't figure out just one thing. So I worked out what's the overarching umbrella of all these things.
Oh, you zoomed
and that's
right
my
out.
answer.
Okay, well, all right. I think listeners, we have to keep her accountable on this number. Like the
number one thing that stops couples from feeling truly connected is their unresolved emotional wounds.
Yeah, I mean, I saw that one coming.
Yes.
I think the idea of these shorter ones is to probably just get a little bit more specific.
Well,
okay, if we take all of those, what's the number one traumatic thing that would...
I'm still standing by it, and here's why. Because it doesn't matter what the unresolved emotional wound is, how I would handle it would be exactly the same.
Okay.
And so
go on.
My thought is, how can unresolved emotional wounds show up though? And it's things like defensiveness. It's things like blaming someone. It's things like avoidance. It's your fight response, right? So defensiveness, fight, blaming, avoidance. If we don't feel emotionally safe, if we cannot open up and be fully heard, if we cannot communicate honestly or openly or truly see each other, then we cannot feel connected. And so when it comes to unresolved emotional wounds, what would I do about that? I would actually process the unresolved wounds. And my approach to that would be exactly the same, regardless of what that wound might look like. So for me, I looked at this and thought, okay, the other things I was thinking of which didn't really sit in that was a lot of skill gaps. So I find that in relationships, a lot of couples lack the skills required to actually feel connected and have a healthy relationship. And, those skills might be communication, it might be understanding attachment styles, it might be like all these things. But even in the absence of those skills, I feel that if we resolved the emotional wounds from our past that each of us had, even before we met, by virtue of doing that, our relationship would be healthier.
I think everything would be healthier.
Everything would be healthier, absolutely.
So if you had to, because what I'm sort of hearing is sort of like, what's the number one thing that stops people from connecting? Well, they're unhealed. Okay, so heal yourself. That's the number one tip. Yeah. If we had to be just a little bit more specific and maybe sort of go on to the first thing that pops into your mind, like we did on the first one. You remember the first episode we did about kids? Let's just take one bit. I think back then we talked about how to deal with tantrums with kids, right? As like the worst parenting tip. What's Ash's number one reason if you had to sort of go a little bit more focused?
I need you to help me understand what. Give me some examples.
Okay, so for me, the number one tip from me, and this is not all encompassing because I think these little short snippets are just about taking one thing and just sort of running with it for a bite-sized bit. For me, it's vulnerability, right? So to be vulnerable, yes, you have to go through that process of healing, right? But we're just going to talk about vulnerability for one moment and sort of say, if you are being open and honest and vulnerable with your partner and you're not afraid to do that, and both of you are doing it at the same time, it opens up the communication, it opens up the safe space, it opens up the environment for that healing. Because otherwise, this whole topic of how do you lose connection will mean you had connection at some point. And so either there was vulnerability and you've gotten hardened over time, or there's no way to go back and fix yourself before you start the relationship at this point in time. So what you're trying to do now is, how do we recreate a connection, a closeness, a safe space where you can be yourself? So being vulnerable, that then allows sort of like your authentic needs to come out, your authentic self. And so this is not all encompassing, because I agree wholeheartedly with you, right? But I'm holding you to the one thing, right?
To me, I'm seeing through my lens, resolving your emotional wounding as my one thing.
Okay.
100%.
All right. Okay.
People could disagree with me. I'm okay with that.
Or in the comments.
In the comments, let me know. And I say this because what that ultimately looks like is having self-awareness, taking responsibility for your triggers, and repair rather than react. So what's the outcome of that? And if we imagine a relationship where we had more self-awareness, we actually took responsibility for our triggers rather than just blaming someone else and outsourcing it, and then actually chose to repair rather than react to situations from our defensiveness or avoidance or whatever that looks like, how deeply seen, heard, understood, valued you would feel in your relationship. So
huge.
To me, like, I think the reason I'm struggling is because I don't know what you're actually asking me to isolate into. And if it's, well, what wound? Like, is that the question? If you had to pick one wound, or, well, then I can't really answer that, because then it defeats the purpose. Because if we just said, okay, everyone's going to heal their abandonment wounding, that might be completely irrelevant for someone in a couple, and that's not the reason they're feeling disconnected. So it doesn't actually make sense.
Or a sense of worthiness, or love yourself. And
so that doesn't really make sense to me. It's important for, like, it catches everything, because your emotional wounds are going to be different to your partner's. And so even if your partner resolved their abandonment issues, but you might not have resolved your, I don't know, anxious attachment issues or whatever that might look like.
Ooh,
do you know what I mean?
That's for another episode, for sure.
It's purely just about understand what your wounds are and deal with it.
Okay.
And if both people in the relationship actually understand what their own wounds are and they deal with it, there's going to be deeper connection by virtue of that, because they're going to be more whole parts of themselves, creating a whole in the entity of the relationship. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
It does. Okay, so how about this? What would be the first thing you would do to start yourself on that process if you haven't started?
I would recognize my role in where things are going wrong.
Okay, so self-accountability.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I would be better if they would stop doing this. Or
looking at self, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that sort of self-accountability. So Ash's hot tip, the number one thing you can do to get started in all of this is self-accountability. Love it. Okay. Yeah, so...
And what's the number one thing people can do to be more vulnerable? What's the flip side of, if lack of vulnerability is the number one thing that stops couples from feeling connected, what is their number one thing that they can do to reverse that or change that?
The funny thing is, and I don't want this to get into a long-winded thing, but vulnerability is almost the carrot at the end of a stick, right? As you're going to achieve that vulnerability, you actually can't do it without healing some sense of self, right?
Exactly.
So when I sort of come back to what was my number one thing, well, being vulnerable isn't just a single lever in its own sense. You have to be able to go through the fact and think about why you're not being vulnerable in the first place. So for me, it was, what did I see vulnerability as? I saw it as weakness. Why is that? Okay. And then it's my perception of self. Why is it that I view, or my identity is I have to be strong, stoic, unmovable, rock or tree or whatever it is,
Yep.
and I have to do it all by myself, right? So look, by virtue, we are singing the same thing. We're just rephrasing it in a very different way to sort of, try out this new format, which is quite
Love
cool.
these conversations.
And so, like with anything, everything's interconnected. You've just zoomed right out. I've just taken one bit and sort of said, well, if you can do that, what you've actually done is A, B, C, D, E, all the way through.
So good.
But sometimes that's what people need,
Yeah.
right? Is that sort of, can I just, instead of standing 1 inch away from an elephant and going, what the hell am I looking at? I can smell it, I can sense it, and this is sort of whatever. Sometimes it's difficult to stand right back and go, oh, that's an elephant. Sometimes there needs to be that, well, if I just focus on one thing, which is that, and then suddenly by virtue of focusing on that, they then find their way and explore on their path to that. Hence why for me, it was vulnerability. So, and I know with my previous relationships, had I had that, there would have been a big difference. And what I have now with my relationships, with the vulnerability, whole new level. So that for me has been that kind of one common theme. But you're right, it might not be everyone's common theme. Maybe people overshare. Maybe some people are just so easy to express that they just express everything as a traumatic response to, something else.
And also it's just learned behavior.
Yeah.
Totally.
So
Totally.
it
Well,
can
let's
be-
keep this short and sharp.
What have we had? Jeez, almost 12 minutes.
So good.
All right.
Let us know in the comments, guys. We want to hear what was in your, even before you heard our answers, just based on the question, what was the number one thing that you feel stops couples from feeling truly connected? And if you are in a relationship, let us know in the comments what you think it is for you.
And if you disagree with us, let us know. And again,
Absolutely.
as this is a new format and sort of something different, it's sort of like on the shorter side. We're used to rambling on for at least 45 minutes, something like that, because we love the sound of our own voices. Tell us what you think about this new format. Do you like it? We're just going to pepper them in throughout, each month or something like that. But let us know. Your feedback is important, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
See you then.
Bye-bye.